Hi, welcome to the garage. I'm David Schoneman. Have you ever wondered about taking a pile of rusty, old, vintage motorcycle parts like this and making them into something like this? We're going to show you how. Stay with us. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the garage. I'm David Schoneman. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for tuning in. Well, today we are starting on a new series in the show, and that's what this motorcycle is all about. We'll talk about that in a moment, but I want to just recap some of what we did in the past. I hope you were watching some of the previous shows. If not, you might want to look them up on YouTube. In the past, the last series, we took a bunch of parts that I had here in the shop for an old motorcycle. Some of them were mixed and matched. There was one frame and an engine that matched, but most of the other parts were from a variety of bikes. And rather than selling them on eBay, I thought, well, let's put them together into a motorcycle. Well, we've completed that project. And if you saw the last video, you'll know that that is done. And all we're waiting on is riding it in the spring. When we get better weather, we can do some test riding. But the engine has been run. It works. Brakes, lights, electrical, everything works on the bike, waiting for a test ride. It was a great project, and it was fun to do. As I was nearing completion on that project, I began thinking about what to do after this. After that one, were we just done, wrap it up, or is there something else we can do? I don't have enough old parts in the shop anymore to build another bike, so I was just kind of puzzling what we could do. And when I got an email from a viewer who lives about an hour away, and he said that he enjoyed the show and had an old bike and was wondering if maybe that could be the basis for a new series. And I went down to take a look at it. He lives, like I say, about an hour away down in Massachusetts, and I saw the bike. It was a nice bike. This is it. And I bought the thing, and now we've been contemplating what to do for the new show. We're going to talk about that. This is a 1972 BMW R75/5. In the opening episodes of the previous series, I showed you a whole bunch of bikes that I had in the shop, one of which was a BMW Scrambler with a dark red tank. That was also that was a 1971 BMW R75/5, a very similar bike. I liked that bike. I've since sold that bike. And I've had my eye on wanting to get another one, and then this one came along from our viewer, and I thought it sounded like a good opportunity. This one is, it's got an interesting story. The gentleman I bought it from from a consignment shop down in Massachusetts, a motorcycle consignment shop in the mid-90s. And it was a daily rider bike for the previous owner. It was a daily rider bike for the gentleman that I bought it from. And he rode it for a number of years, up until the late 90s. Put a lot of miles on it. He's an avid rider, still an avid rider today. And he was going to put it away into storage for the winter. And he started it up to warm it up, to ride it to the storage location. And as it was warming up, he noticed smoke coming out of the headlight bucket. Electrical smoke rising. Now, of course, there's no combustion in here. There's nothing in there except wires. These old bikes have a lot of wires in the headlight buckets. And he thought there could be, obviously, an electrical problem. So we shut it down immediately. He opened up the headlight bucket, and he found some melted wires, melted insulation. Now, obviously, there was a short. He knew that the bike had been worked on by the previous owner, and some of the wiring was non-standard. And he intended, after that episode, to take a look at it and to fix it. He bought another harness for the bike, wiring harness from BMW, and meant to get to it. But things happen, as they do for all of us, right? We say life gets in the way, and that's what happened. And that's what happened to him. So this bike sat year after year after year in a garage or in a storage unit, but it sat and sat and sat, waiting for the opportunity. And unfortunately, it just never occurred. That gentleman is about my age, and at some point you say, well, I'm going to ride something newer or less trouble involved. Some of these old bikes do require a little more maintenance, a little more attention. So he decided to sell it, and I bought it. So this bike has been sitting now in a garage since the late 90s, so that's about 25 years. It's not been outside, it's been inside, and like I say, it was a well cared for bike prior to that time, certainly after that time, because it was indoors and stored well. But it's been sitting for a long time. Now, if you look on various motorcycle posts or antique car posts, they talk about barn finds. This motorcycle was a barn find. And I've worked on some barn finds, and they're entirely different than this. I went to see a barn find way up in northern New Hampshire a year or two ago, and it was another BMW. Looked good in the pictures. I didn't buy it because it was a complete wreck. It had been sitting outside for quite a long time. And maybe that's an outside the barn find, but it was a disaster, really good for the junk pile only, unless you're really into bolts up restoration. This one, no, I wouldn't call it a barn find because it was better cared for than that. Now, I have worked on some other bikes that were stored in an outdoor shed for 20 plus years. There's much more exposure to temperature change in a shed like that, and you can have little mice coming in, animals and whatnot that can make their nests in there. And that happened on that bike, but that bike ultimately ran well. This one, again, has not been subject to that kind of mistreatment. This bike has been inside for a long period of time, but nevertheless, it has been sitting for a long time. So now it's a 50-year-old bike, 53-year-old bike, I would say. Just to give you some perspective, this bike, it looks somewhat modern. I mean, it's not a bicycle with a motor on it. It's a motorcycle. But in 1972, when this bike was brand new, and I was in high school at the time, and if I wanted to work on an old vehicle at that time, something 50 years old, it would have been a Model T. So in the 1970s, a Model T was 50 years old. A friend of mine has one. We got it going this past summer. It's just an interesting comparison, I think, to think that when this thing was new, 50 years old was a Model T. And now here we are in 2024, and this doesn't, at 50 years old, doesn't seem quite as old as a Model T seemed to be back in the 70s. So our project on this one, I'm thinking, because the bike is mostly complete. We've got everything here, and it's a beautiful bike. I'll talk a little bit more about it, and it's been well maintained, even in the interim storage period. But since most things are here, the bike is complete, rather than take it apart and make it into something else, I think I want to get this back in running condition. Not necessarily a showroom style restoration. In fact, I don't think I want to do that. I want to keep some of the vintage look. This bike, there's a little chip here in the tank. We'll talk about a few more things on the bike as we go through it. But that's patina. And I want to keep the patina so that ultimately this bike will be a daily rider, super reliable, ready to go, clean, everything working, but have it look like it's 50 years old. Not in bad shape, in great shape, but still have it look like it's an old motorcycle. I want to preserve that patina. That's my concept on this one. As you know from the previous project, I had concepts in the beginning that ultimately were changed. We talked about the color of the tank and the seat and all those kinds of things. A lot of things changed as I was building that bike. But this one, I don't think is going to change as much. I could be wrong, but I don't think it's going to change as much because the basic plan of the bike is already here. We're going to take some things apart as necessary to clean them up or whatnot, but we're going to put it back together mostly as is, if possible. If there are some parts that need replacing, we're going to replace them. But we want to preserve the vintage look of this bike. So I just rolled the bike into the garage just last week, and we're going to start today on this new series, going through it. This is what I would typically do when I come across a motorcycle like this, and I'm contemplating doing it as a project. What am I looking for? What do we have here? Do we have something good, or do we have something that's bad, or are some of the bad things hidden? We don't know when we first see it. I will say I'm not finding a lot of things a lot of bad things hidden on this bike at all. I think it's in great shape. And the gentleman I bought it from is named Max. Max, if you're watching, thanks. I think we got a great bike here. Hope you enjoyed the series too. I'm going to walk through from front to back what I would look for on a first impression basis when I come across a bike like this. First off, it was in the garage at his house, at Max's house, and we were able to roll it out. So right away, I know that the wheels roll. I've seen bikes before where they don't roll, and it still can be a good project, but some of those bikes don't roll. And they might not roll for a variety of reasons. One, it could be stuck in gear. That could happen. The wheel bearings could be frozen, or the brakes could be locked. But in this case, the bike rolled easily. And I was able to get it here in the garage, in my garage. So let's just go over some of the things that I'm looking at as we look at a bike like this. The wheels do roll. It's very nice. I don't feel any grinding. There's no rubbing. The bearings, at first impression, seem to be good. Now, it's been sitting for a long time, but prior to being put away, this bike was ridden all the time. And the storage, like I say, was good. So the bearings, I'm imagining, are probably as good today as they were when they were put away. Steel bearings, they're probably okay. BMW, by the way, does a good job, and they've always done a good job, I think, with their motorcycles. They're built for the long term. So it rolls easily. The rim, the aluminum rim, seems to be straight, and it's pretty clean. Now, it's aluminum, it's not going to rust, but it looks pretty clean. That's good. The tire itself, it certainly needs to be replaced. So it's a 25-year-old tire at least. There's a little bit of dry rot on the sides. It's not too bad. The tires are holding air. We put air into them when I picked the bike up, and they're still holding air. They're doing fine, but they're going to need to be replaced. So the fact that the tires are not bald and look to be good branded tires tells me that the gentleman who owned it took good care of it. He put on good tires, not junky tires. Back then, there were only a few brands that would have been good. Today, there's far more brands that we can choose from, and we'll choose some new tires for this bike. The spokes are steel. Now, steel can rust or tarnish, but these spokes look to be pretty clean. I'll go over the spokes again a little bit later when we come around the other side of the bike, but the spokes look to be in good shape. There's not a lot of corrosion, a little bit of white powdery dust kind of stuff here on the aluminum pieces, but they look pretty good. The fender, this is an somewhat unusual color for a BMW, because a lot of BMWs, certainly back in the day, they were all black. Everything was black. But this fender, it's a fiberglass fender, and I like the paint. It's white, obviously. It's not a super bright white like a police bike white. It's a little bit of a creamy white, and I think that's a nice color on these bikes. And the striping here appears to be done by hand, and I believe that it was. BMW back in the early 70s, or maybe even to some extent today, I'm not 100% sure, did a lot of their pinstriping by hand. So this appears to be an original fender, and it's the pinstriping looks good, paint looks pretty good. No rust, of course, because it's fiberglass. The forks, there's oil in these forks, but there's no sign of leaking. That's a good sign too. The seals maybe are still good. There's nothing dripping out of this bike. Overall, there's nothing dripping out of this bike. No oil drips, and there's oil in the crankcase. We'll get to that. There's a little bit of fuel in the tank. There's no dripping there. So the fact that there's no drips out of the forks is good. These rubber boots, these appear to be, they're probably original, but they're very pliable. And a lot of times, cheap rubber boots, maybe from some other manufacturers, will turn brittle with age and crack. These are soft. They don't appear to have any tears or breaks. They look pretty good. The turn signals appear to be aftermarket. I'm not sure what's going on here. The standard mount for a BMW turn signal is not bolted onto this little bolt here with a piece of bent metal. This may be some of the wiring that was done over inside the headlight bucket that's causing that short. I don't know. But the turn signals don't appear to be original, and I don't know why. That's something to think about. Did they break? Did whoever had it not like them and want to change them out? Who knows? A turn signal can break if the bike falls. Now, I don't see any evidence that this bike has ever been down, but maybe at some point it was and the old turn signals broke. So the turn signals are not original. If we can get them to work, maybe we'll keep them, or maybe we'll go to something a little different. Get to the headlight bucket. The key on these old bikes goes into the bucket, and the key is here. A lot of times, old motorcycles won't have a key. I can't seem to get it out now, but I had it out before. Anyway, the key here is in the top of the headlight bucket. So we have a key. That's a good sign. We got the speedometer and tachometer built into the headlight bucket, just like we had on that red one that I showed you in the last series. And the mileage shows 62,500. So it's got a few miles on it. That would be a lot for a Honda. It's not a lot for a BMW. I saw a video not too long ago where a father and his son were rebuilding the BMW engine, and it had about 150,000 miles on it, and they thought, well, it's about time. I can see that at 150,000, it might be about time. But at 62,000, if the motor's in good shape, we may not need to take it apart. We'll talk about what it means for the motor to be in good shape in a moment. Moving back, we've got a non-standard handlebar riser here. The handlebars look to be stock. The switches, there's switches on each side. The switches still move. I don't know if they still make contact or not, but they still move. And you can press them in. There's press buttons as well as turning, and they all seem to work. The clutch lever over here, I can pull the clutch lever, and it operates the clutch. It's not binding. It works. The brake lever on this side also works. And you can see the levers moving down there if the wheel's rolling. The brake works and stops the front wheel. So again, it's a sign that things have been, I think, well cared for. There's two throttle cables because one cable goes to each carburetor, one on each side. And the throttle is a little stiff. It doesn't want to spring back. The spring for the throttle would be on the carburetor itself. So they may be a little bit gummed up, but it does turn either way. And I can see the levers on the carburetors moving as I do that, but there may be a little gumminess inside the carbs. Next we get to the tank. Now the tank, one of the things I liked about this bike is the style of the tank. The red bike, if you remember, had a different shape. It was a taller, shorter tank. This one is actually the same shape as the green BMW that I showed you back in the first series. But this has an a steel panel on the side. And it can be polished up. For an obvious reason, these tanks are called toaster tanks. And the side looks like a toaster from the 1970s or 50s or whatever. So this can be polished up. It looks pretty good. I like that style. These are, I think, very attractive to me. The tank. I always look in the tank. When I first opened the tank on this bike, I was a little surprised to find that there was still gasoline in here. The gasoline in here now is 25 years old, I'm guessing. There'd be no need to put more gas into a bike that wasn't running. I can see it sloshing around in there. It's about up to here. So I got to drain that gas out of there at some point. When I first opened the cap, caked inside the opening here was a thick layer of brown gunk. It was sort of damp, but it wasn't like sticky. It was like if you ever go to a coffee shop where they make espresso, and when they're done making the espresso, they take the portafilter out and they it's called a puck, knock a puck into the garbage can. And that puck of coffee is about the size of the portafilter, which is the same size as this opening. It's dark brown, kind of wet, but granular, and about that thick. And inside here, I found what looked like a puck from a coffee machine, an espresso coffee machine. I pulled some out, and I was surprised. It was, like I said, wet, granular, fell apart, and I frankly don't know what it was. It was something that was caused by the fuel. But why did it accumulate there? It wasn't rust because it was just sitting there, stuck underneath the cap. I stuck a long screwdriver down in there, and I could feel some of the same kind of sludge, it felt to me, down at the bottom of the tank. As I moved the screwdriver on, it felt like there was something down there, not just liquid. I can see the liquid, so I know there's gasoline in there, and the gasoline just doesn't hold up well, and it stinks pretty bad too. You can't smell it on the video, so you're lucky with that. But we'll have to drain that. We'll do some of that today. But the tank shows no signs of leaking, and I checked down here along this welded seam on the inside and the out, and there's no feeling of rust coming through on either side. Again, the tank being inside the garage was probably okay. By the way, the fuel, if we had good old-fashioned plain gasoline in here, it would have been fine. But this undoubtedly has some ethanol in it, and the ethanol is what causes the problem, what causes gas to get old. If you have a lawnmower, and you run it every year, even if you don't run it during the course of the winter, it's still okay in the spring. But if you let it go 2 winters, maybe 3 winters without using it, you're going to find that gas has gone bad. It's no longer clear. It's kind of a yellowish color. Yellow color appears pretty quickly from the ethanol, but this gas, I'm sure, is quite bad. It's been sitting for a long time, and the problem with it is the ethanol. If it was pure gasoline, it would still be okay, but it's not. We've got the 2 carburetors. We've got a fuel valve here. We've got this engine guard. That's an option. And I noticed, too, on the engine guard, there's no scraping, no scratching. A lot of times engine guards are put there so that if the bike goes down, it lands on that guard, not on the cylinder of the valve cover. And there's no scratching on either side on that engine guard or on the valve covers, which tells me that at least since these covers were put on, or those engine guards were put on, that the bike has not been down. Another good sign. We move back. Actually, we can take a look here too. I tried these valves, and I found that the valves move. That's also a good sign. Even though the gas is old, the gas has not gummed up the valve so much that it can't operate. We come back a little farther. We have these nice chrome plates here to match the chrome here, and they're also in pretty good shape. No bubbling. Sometimes chrome can separate. The chrome, it's a thin layer put on top of steel. That chrome layer can separate and you get rust underneath. I don't see any evidence of that here on either side. We get to the seat, and the seat is original. There's no tears. It's a vinyl seat made for 2-up riding. There's a white welt here that is a little bit yellowed with time, but no cracks. There's no cracks in the seat. On the back, it says R75/5. It's got the model name. There's a button over here I can push to raise the seat. It hinges up. And there's a holder for the toolkit. The toolkit's not here. Actually, there's one tool here, and there are some spark plugs too. So the spark plugs are handy. The spark plugs these engines need, they're not made anymore. NGK used to make them. We want non-resistor type plugs, and these old bikes, it just works better. NGK stopped making non-resistor type plugs, which is too bad. That was a few years ago. There's a tube just underneath the tank here, forward of the seat. It's a hollow tube. BMW does all kinds of interesting things for storage. And inside that tube, this looks like it was bought after the fact, is the original BMW style lock. This would have gone around the frame, gone through the wheel, and you can snap the thing closed, and you got a lock. So here's an original BMW lock, still stored in the same place. And I checked before, there's 2 keys on this loop of keys up here, and the second key is for that lock. So we have a lock. That's a nice touch, I think. Got the rear fender here under the seat. It also looks to be in great shape. No cracks. It looks fine. I found a box underneath the seat, and it's a little hard, but it's connected, hard to get it out. It's connected to the wiring. and I was wondering what it was. It turns out that it's a module that will cause the brake lights to flash, the turn signals to flash rapidly when you first apply them. So it's a safety feature. This is one of the things that was added to the wiring by a previous owner. And it's connected with some of those trailer wire connectors that you may have seen, where you just clamp it around a wire and it cuts the insulation and makes contact. That's not the way we're going to do it. We're going to do all our wires soldered or proper connections. And we're going to remove this and redo the wiring. Use that new harness most likely, so that all the electrical is back to original. We've got this nice rack back here. I think it looks great. Luggage rack, it's an option. Again, we've got turn signals back here that appear to be non-standard, and the standard BMW brake light. Here on the side, we've got black exhaust that is not original. It would have been chrome. Now, it turns out I do still have some parts left from previous projects. And one of the things I have, actually two of the things I have a set of mufflers. So I may end up swapping the chrome BMW mufflers out for these. The pipes too are black, and they would normally be chromed. So I'm not sure what the story is on those. But we have a black header pipe and black mufflers, and they would normally have been chromed. Maybe we'll swap those out. We'll see. The foot pegs, well-worn rubber on the foot peg. To be expected, it means that people were riding this bike and enjoying it. So we can replace that. But overall, my overall impression is that everything is good. And the rear wheel, of course, spins too. Same thing we have. We have a good rim. We got clean-looking spokes, maybe a little dry rot in the tires, but like I say, good tires were installed on the bike. All right, now I'm going to go through it again, but take a little closer look, because I'm making a list of what will need to be done to get this bike to where it needs to be. So let me start at the front once again. I'm just going to show you what we do to test the front, the wheels, the spokes. So I said the wheel rolls, and it certainly does. Now, spokes are just basically wires, thick wire, steel wire that is tightened into place to make sure that the rim is exactly centered over the axle. And this one looks to be pretty centered. I don't see really any major wobbling on it. There is one little flat spot I see on the rim, right about there. I'm not sure what may have happened. Maybe it got dinged at one point. I have some other rims. If I ever were to determine that this rim needs to be replaced, I could put another one on, but I don't think we're going to need to do that. But what we do is we start at a known reference point, like the valve stem here, and we just tap on the spokes, and we listen for the tone. The tone should be pretty similar, and it should have a nice ring to it. If we get to one where it doesn't have that kind of bell ringing sound, then we'd say, well, we got a little issue with that spoke. That one, maybe a little soft. That's got a nice tone. That one's a little dead. That one's a little dead too. Definitely dead. No real ringing sound. It should sound like a bell. It doesn't. That one's kind of dead. That one's good. We're back to the beginning. So I tested the spokes on this side of the wheel. Later, before the next show, I'll test them on the right side on the left side of the wheel too. So we're going to have to do something with the spokes. I'll check to make sure that they're tight. They don't need to be equally tight, but they need to be similarly tight. If one starts to loosen, others around it can begin to loosen, and it's a safety feature. So given that the bike has 62,000 miles on it, and it has been sitting now for 25 years, I will just double check those spoke nuts to make sure that they're properly tightened. We'll change the oil in the forks too. There's a drain on the bottom and there's a fill point at the top. We'll take off the fill point at the top, we'll drain it out, and we'll replace the oil. Anytime something's been sitting that long. Actually, replacing fork oil is a regular maintenance item anyway, every so often. Doesn't need to be done every year, but it's been quite a long time sitting, so we're going to take care of that. Coming back to the headlight bucket, a little more in-depth look, I can see residue of tape, maybe duct tape that was wrapped around here that would have held the headlight bucket on, or the headlight rim. This chrome ring here has got a dent in it, so it suffered a little ding somewhere, and I can pop this headlight bucket off. It's just a clip, and I can look in here, and I see a lot of electrical tape. I see some melted insulation, a lot of original wires, but some wires that certainly are not original. So I'm going to be pulling the headlight bucket off. There's a fuse connection. Doesn't appear to have any insulation on it at all. I'm going to pull the headlight bucket off, working it on the bench, and get everything in here as squared away as I can before we put it back on. I may even paint this. We'll see. I certainly want to get the tape residue off. We don't like the tape residue to be showing there. And I don't want to be holding it on with tape in the future. I want it to go together the proper way. I talked about these boots. They're in pretty good shape. Coming back, I see some duct tape wrapped around a wire here. And I don't know why that is. We'll have to do some investigation. Duct tape on a motorcycle or in a car is generally not a good sign. I mean, someone did some kind of a patch where maybe a better way could have been found. On the handlebars, once again, I talked about standard switchology, switches and whatnot. There are risers here that do not appear to be proper. So we're going to replace those. They bring the handlebar back closer to the rider. I've got long arms. I want them to be where they're supposed to be. So I'm going to put different risers on. But as we turn the steering wheel to the side, or the front forks to the side handlebars, get the handlebar comes very close to the tank. And we don't want that either. We want that to be proper distance so that our fingers aren't getting jammed in there. And by the way, the steering, we test the steering too. The steering seems to be in good shape. There are roller bearings in here, and they can last a good long time. A lot of the Japanese bikes have ball bearings in there, and they're a little different. You might turn the wheel like this on an old bike, and you'll feel it kind of go chunk, 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 like that as it moves along. It feels rough, lumpy. This has no lumpiness to it at all, very smooth. Depending on how far we get into it, may take all that apart and clean all that grease out of there. The grease tube, by the way, ages, and we might find that grease has gotten kind of waxy. So if that happens, or if that's the case, then we'll take that apart. But again, I'm trying not to take anything more apart or not to replace anything more than I absolutely have to on this bike. All right, this brings us back to engine. I'm going to take a closer look at spark plugs. Again, all we're trying to do is to figure out what the bike might need as we make our list of what needs to be done. So we pull the plugs, and I find right away that the plugs are not stuck. They're not tight, which is good. This plug it's dark. It's the proper kind of plug. It's dark, a little bit oily. Now, oil's not bad in a bike that's been sitting for a long time because it means that maybe rust would not have had a chance. Again, that's not over tight, which is good. Sometimes older bikes, you find things are over tightened, and that's never a good sign. This plug is not quite as dark. Again, it's a Bosch plug, platinum. A little bit oily on the threads, but not too bad. Now, there's no battery in it. We haven't tested for spark, nothing like that. I noticed that the spark plug wires, they may have good connections inside, but they're stiff, and the rubber feels kind of brittle. So I'm probably going to replace the spark plug wires. Now, one of the big things to check for is whether the motor turns. We know the wheels roll, but does the motor turn? With the plugs out, now there will be no compression. And while there's no battery, I can't hit a button. This version of the BMW had a kickstarter. So there's a kickstart lever over here. I'm going to lift my foot up and see if I can make the thing spin. Okay, the motor spins. That's a good sign. The dipstick is on this side. I'll pull the dipstick and see what we see. If there's water in the oil, we're going to see like looks like cocoa, like chocolate milk kind of an effect. But this is not. There's looks to have sufficient oil in it. And it's a little dark to be expected because, like I say, it was a running bike. Maybe the oil would have been changed at the beginning of the new season. Again, the bike last ran when it was being put away. But there's oil in the motor. That's good. By the way, we're going to change all of the fluids, of course. But on these BMWs, we have 4 places for fluid, for oil. One is the engine. Second is the transmission, has its own oil. Third is the drive shaft. This is the swing arm. The drive shaft is inside. There's a little bit of oil in there. And the fourth is the final drive unit back here. So we're going to change all those fluids as well as the fluid up front. Now, next thing I want to do is take some fuel out of the tank so you can see what I'm talking about. And then we're going to drain the tank too. So this is a fuel valve here. I'm just going to cut this hose. We don't need it anymore. I'm going to cut it down here too, get this piece out of the way. And we'll pull this section of hose off. I'm going to stick this under here and see if any fuel will flow. Well, it's flowing slowly. Let me try reserve. Also flowing slowly. So whatever sludge is in the bottom of the tank has probably made it into the pickup point. I'll let this go just a little bit. It is flowing slow. It'll take a while to drain the tank. We're not going to do it on the show here, but the valve does operate properly. It shuts off. Now you can see that's pretty dark gasoline. I've never seen 25-year-old gasoline. It has a little bit of a red color to it, and I'm wondering if maybe there was some stabilizer added to the fuel when it was going to be put away, just to prevent it from being too bad. Stabilizer preserves the fuel. It may also help with moisture absorption. I don't really know. But in any event, that fuel is very dark. Gasoline should not be that color. That's pretty bad. So we're going to drain that gasoline out. And then we'll get the tank off. Let me set that up real quick. I've got not an old can, but a can here where I can drain the gas in. We can see that flowing while we're doing the rest of the show. We'll get some of this going. I'm going to put a little clamp on there, I think. Just because I don't want it all over the garage floor. We'll get this flowing, and then we'll talk about the rest of the bike as we move back. We're going to use new hose, and the new hose that we use, like we use on all of our projects, doesn't require hose clamps, but this is just a temporary hose. And we want to clamp it down just so we're not getting any leaks. Oh, there's a little bit of fuel flowing. You can see it right there in the tube. All right, we'll let that go. So downstream from the tank are the carburetors. And the carburetors too, maybe I can pop that off. Let me try that. We'll see what's inside the carburetor. The carburetors, I think, will definitely have to come off. I'm going to pour this back in here. It's not going to hurt at this stage. It'll make its way into the can. So these carburetor float bowls come off just by flipping this little lever and taking the bowl off. Wow. Now, if you can see that, but it's actually very clean. Very clean. Not at all what I would expect. A little bit of residue in there, but it's not full of fuel, which is good. And on the last show, last series, we talked about the carburetors. We have new carburetors on that bike, but carburetor has a number of fuel circuits inside of it, and they're very, very small openings and places for fuel to pass through. And any kind of grit or grime, and there is some in here, a little gritty, can clog up some of those passages, and then we're not going to have good flow. So we're going to take these carburetors off. I think we'll probably stick with the Bing carburetors in this bike because, again, it's original. So we're going to stick with those, and we'll just clean them up and reuse them. There's really no reason that I can see at this stage why they wouldn't be reusable. All right, moving further back, we've got the drive shaft here, the swing arm. This is a short swing arm bike. These swing arms, explained in the last series, come in two different lengths. There's a long wheelbase and short wheelbase. This is short wheelbase. I like short wheelbase. It handles well. Long wheelbase, like we did on the other project, is more for stability with speed. But the short wheelbase handles well. There's a rubber boot here, too, between the transmission and the swing arm. And as the suspension moves up and down, this rubber boot flexes. And again, this rubber boot looks to be in very good shape. I can't imagine. Maybe it was replaced. Maybe it's not original. I don't know. But the rubber that they use is very high quality, and it lasts a long time. What can happen as the swing arm moves up and down, that boot flexes, and the rubber can crack, and then you get a leak. The swing arm is not full of oil, but it is about half full, just to lubricate the U-joints in there, universal joints, and you can get a leak here too. But what Max told me and what I've observed here is that there's no oil leaking anywhere on this bike. There's oil in it. We just checked that with the dipstick. There's no oil leaking, so all the seals and everything are in good shape. So again, it's a bike that seems to be in pretty good condition overall. Well, I'm going to let this drain. It's going to take a little while, I think. And then I'll pop the tank off, and then we'll get to work on all the things that I've been outlining here so that when we come back for the next installment on this series, we'll have some more news for you, and we'll let you know how things are coming. But this is our new project, 1972 BMW R75/5. /5 is just a version number. The green BMW I had before, that's a /6. It had a disc brake in the front. This has a drum brake in the front. And the one we did in the last series, the one that we just completed, was a /7, so a little more advanced. But this all looks to be in pretty good shape. All the parts are here. It doesn't appear to have been abused. And I think we're going to get this thing to be a running bike by the spring. So I hope you enjoy it. Any questions or comments, please send me an email. You can reach me at milliard.moto@gmail.com. And I'd be glad to talk with you. If you have a project that you'd like us to take a look at or that you need some help with, please let us know. I've also got one over here. You can't quite see it in the frame, I don't think. There's a red tank on a motorcycle sitting over here. I've got a couple of Yamaha projects that I'm working on too. This, I think, is more interesting than that. That one we're going to be exploring experimenting with making some frame modifications. We're going to convert that from a two-shock model to a monoshock model in the rear. So there's some structural welding involved. But those are good projects. Maybe we'll have a episode or two on that. And then we're going to follow up with more episodes on this bike as we move forward. So that's it. Any questions or comments, please let us know. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.